September 20th, 2017, the island woke up to rain.
Hurricane Maria slamming Puerto Rico Wednesday.
By noon, the sky ripped open. By evening, almost everything that made life work had stopped. Power, phones, hospitals, roads. And at the center of it all was a storm so violent it would leave thousands dead and change Puerto Rico forever. This is Hurricane Maria, one of the deadliest hurricanes in U.S. recorded history. What a lot of people don't realize, though, is that the story didn't start on the 20th. Just days before Hurricane Maria arrived, Puerto Rico was already exhausted. On September 6th, 2017, Hurricane Irma had passed just north of the island. It didn't hit directly, but it damaged power lines, flooded roads, and left hundreds of thousands without electricity. Crews were still fixing the damage. Many areas were still in the dark. So when weather alerts started mentioning another storm in the Atlantic, most people didn't panic. They had just survived one. Out in the Atlantic Ocean, Maria began as a tropical wave, small, disorganized, and easy to ignore. At first, it didn't look dangerous, but the ocean beneath it was warm, very warm. And over the next few days, Maria began to grow. By September 17th, the storm had strengthened into a hurricane. By the 18th, it was intensifying fast. This wasn't a slow storm. It was feeding on heat and moisture, growing stronger hour by hour. Meteorologists started to raise alarms. Maria was heading straight for Puerto Rico. Warnings were issued. Schools were closed. Some evacuations began. But there was a problem. Puerto Rico had seen many hurricanes before. Many people believed they knew what to expect. They did not.
Journalists covering the storm were nearly blown away by it. The aftermath of this storm will also be intense. Heavy rain is still falling.
As Maria approached, its winds surged past 150 miles per hour. The storm was now a Category 4, nearly the strongest a hurricane can be. To put this in perspective, storms this powerful don't hit Puerto Rico often, and when they do, the island suffers for decades. The power grid, already fragile, stood no chance. Hospitals prepared generators. Families stocked food and water. Others stayed home, believing their walls would hold. By that night, rain began to fall. Wind followed soon after. Palm trees bent. Loose objects disappeared into the darkness. Phones buzzed with last messages.
Are you safe?
Where are you?
We're staying inside.
In some areas, electricity flickered, then completely vanished. One by one, towns went dark. By early morning, Maria was just offshore. The storm was massive, violent, and moving directly over the island. People huddled in bathrooms, under staircases, inside shelters already shaking. Outside, the wind screamed, and within hours, Hurricane Maria would tear across Puerto Rico from coast to coast, leaving behind a level of destruction the island had never seen before. As September 20th drew closer, Puerto Rico stopped sleeping. By the evening of September 19th, the rain had already settled in, not the kind that comes and goes, but steady, heavy rain that soaked streets and yards until the ground could hold no more. By 8 p.m., water was already pooling in low-lying neighborhoods. Storm drains backed up. Side streets began to flood. The wind followed soon after. At first, it was just strong gusts rattling windows and doors. Then it grew louder, deeper, like a constant roar moving through entire neighborhoods.
There goes. Down it goes.
By 9 p.m., emergency shelters were reaching capacity. Families arrived carrying backpacks, plastic bags, pets, and whatever food they could grab. Some shelters turned people away, not because they wanted to, but because there was no space left. Thousands had nowhere to go. Many stayed home, not because they felt safe, but because they had no other option. Hospitals moved into emergency mode. Generators were tested repeatedly. Fuel levels were checked again and again. Doctors understood what was coming. Once the power failed, there would be no outside help, no quick repairs, no reinforcements, only whatever fuel and supplies were already inside the building. Along the coast, the ocean began to rise. By 10 p.m., waves were crashing over seawalls and pouring into coastal towns. Fishing boats broke loose from docks and slammed into buildings. Water rushed through streets that had never flooded before. Entire waterfront neighborhoods disappeared under dark, moving water. By 11 p.m., flooding was no longer limited to the coast. Rainwater surged inland. Rivers swelled at alarming speed. Bridges began to weaken. Cell service started to fail. For many families, the last thing they heard from loved ones was static or silence. By midnight, Hurricane Maria was still offshore, and yet the island was already in crisis. Rain fell so hard, it was impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Wind-driven water forced its way through windows and doors. By 1 a.m., standing outside became dangerous. By 2 a.m., it became impossible. Palm trees bent nearly in half. Metal street signs twisted until they snapped. Windows exploded inward under the pressure. Inside homes, families crowded into hallways and bathrooms, listening to the building shake. By 4 a.m., the wind had reached a constant scream. The sound never stopped. But at around 6:15 a.m., Hurricane Maria made landfall. The eye of a Category 4 hurricane slammed directly into Puerto Rico. Winds surged past 160 miles per hour, strong enough to rip roofs off concrete homes, strong enough to flip cars, strong enough to collapse entire buildings. Rain fell so hard, it erased visibility completely. Rivers rose faster than anyone had ever seen. Entire towns flooded in less than an hour. Puerto Rico had never experienced a hurricane this powerful, cut straight across the island in modern history. Maria didn't glance at the coast. It drove directly through the heart of Puerto Rico. By 8 a.m., the power grid began to fail. One power plant shut down, then another. Transmission lines collapsed under wind and falling debris. By mid-morning, the entire electrical system gave away. Puerto Rico lost all electricity, not parts of the island. Not most of it, all of it. This became the largest blackout ever caused by a hurricane in U.S. history. Without power, water systems failed. Hospitals ran only on generators. Communication across the island disappeared. As Maria pushed inland, the mountains made everything worse. Rain piled up over steep terrain, triggering massive landslides. Roads vanished beneath mud and debris. Entire communities were buried or completely cut off. Emergency responders couldn't move. They were trapped by the same destruction they were meant to respond to. Inside homes, people listened as walls cracked and ceilings peeled away. Some homes didn't survive at all. By early afternoon, the storm's eye passed over parts of the island. For a brief moment, there was calm. The rain slowed. The wind eased. Some people stepped outside, believing it was over. But they were wrong. Minutes later, the second half of Hurricane Maria hit, with winds now attacking from the opposite direction.
Hurricane Maria again gaining strength as the storm churns off the eastern shore of the Dominican Republic. Fierce winds and storm surge.
Anything weakened before was destroyed now. Walls collapsed. Remaining roofs vanished. Floodwaters surged again. By late afternoon, Hurricane Maria finally moved away from Puerto Rico. The wind slowly faded. The rain weakened. The hurricane was gone. Cyclone Maria was over, or at least, that's what they thought. What Hurricane Maria left behind was far worse than the storm itself. As night fell on September 20th, Puerto Rico went completely dark. This wasn't a rolling blackout or scattered outages. It was total. From the largest cities to the smallest villages, the entire island lost electricity at the same time. Streetlights never came back on. Cell towers went silent. Emergency alert systems stopped functioning. And what came after that was just complete horror. Scarier than what happened just hours earlier. For millions of people, there was no way to call for help or even know what was happening beyond their immediate surroundings. Hospitals fought to stay operational. Life support machines and critical care equipment now depended entirely on backup generators. These generators were never designed to power entire hospitals for weeks. Fuel became a constant concern, and staff were forced to shut down non-essential systems to preserve electricity for the most critical patients. Dialysis centers were hit especially hard. Many were unable to operate at all. Patients who required regular treatment suddenly had nowhere to go, and in some cases, no way to travel, even if a facility was still open. Outside the hospitals, the situation grew more desperate by the hour. Floodwaters remained high through the night, trapping families inside their homes. In low-lying areas, water rose into living rooms and bedrooms. Some people climbed onto furniture. Others moved into attics, waiting for daylight, hoping the water would stop rising. Rescue crews tried to respond, but they were overwhelmed. Roads were buried under debris or washed away entirely. Bridges had collapsed. Landslides blocked access to mountain communities. In many places, emergency vehicles simply could not move. Fuel supplies were limited. Communication between agencies was almost non-existent. Entire towns could not be reached or even contacted. This is where Hurricane Maria became truly deadly. The storm itself had passed, but the systems people relied on it to survive were gone. Time became the enemy. Every hour without electricity meant spoiled medicine, rising heat, and failing medical equipment. Every hour without clean water increased the risk of illness. Every hour without communication meant people in distress remained unseen. Survival now depended on what little remained. For thousands of people, it wasn't enough.
Look at the worst of Maria's wrath. The hard-hit island of Dominica, total devastation. Nearly everything destroyed. Roads ripped, huge trees uprooted, debris littering the street.
As the hours stretched into days, deaths began to occur quietly. Not from collapsing buildings, not from rushing floodwaters, but from untreated illnesses, missed medical care, heat, hydration, and exhaustion. Hurricane Maria did not stop killing when the wind died down. It continued in darkness. When daylight finally returned to Puerto Rico, it revealed destruction on a scale few people were prepared to understand. Entire neighborhoods had been erased. Roofs were scattered across streets. Cars were buried under falling trees and power lines. In coastal towns, boats rested in the middle of roads, carried there by storm surge strong enough to push the ocean inland. What stood out most was how completely normal life had disappeared. The power grid was gone across the entire island. This was not a partial outage or a temporary failure. Every power plant had shut down. Every major transmission line had collapsed. It was the largest blackout ever caused by a hurricane in U.S. history. Water systems failed soon after. Without electricity, pumping stations stopped working, leaving millions without clean drinking water. Families collected rainwater in buckets. Others boiled what they could find, hoping it was enough to stay healthy. Hospitals remained opened only because of backup generators, but those generators were never meant to run for weeks. Fuel became precious. Doctors and nurses were forced to ration electricity, turning off air conditioning, limiting equipment, and prioritizing only the most critical patients. Outside the hospitals, rescue efforts struggled to gain momentum. Landslides had buried roads in the mountains. Flooding cut off entire regions. Bridges collapsed under the force of the water. Many communities were completely isolated, with no way for help to reach them, and no way for residents to leave. Helicopters flew non-stop, but there were never enough. Supplies moved slowly. Communication with many towns did not exist at all. And as the day passed, something far more dangerous than the wind or rain began to take hold. The deaths did not stop when the storm ended. People who relied on dialysis missed treatments. Patients who needed refrigerated medicine lost access. Elderly residents, already weakened by heat and dehydration, began to die in their homes. In many cases, there was no way to call for help. To put into perspective how deadly and dangerous Hurricane Maria truly was to that place, most of its victims were not killed by collapsing buildings or flooding streets. They died because the system that kept them alive had failed completely. As weeks turned into months, the damage numbers continued to rise. Economic losses passed 90 billion, placing Hurricane Maria among the most expensive natural disasters in U.S. history. Entire industries collapsed. Tens of thousands of homes were left unlivable. Then came the most painful truth. Independent studies revealed that Hurricane Maria was responsible for over 3,000 deaths. These were not counted in a single moment. They were spread across weeks and months, hidden in hospitals, homes, and isolated communities that never fully recovered. By the time the world understood what had happened, the damage was already permanent. In the days after Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico waited, not for comfort, not for explanations, for help. The island's infrastructure was shattered, roads were blocked, airports were damaged, ports were barely functioning. Entire regions had not been heard from since the storm passed. Local officials sent urgent requests for aid. Hospitals reported critical shortages. Doctors warned of rising deaths. But help moved slowly, very slowly. In the first days after the hurricane, federal assistance struggled to reach the island. Cargo ships filled with food and medicine sat offshore. Supplies piled up at ports and warehouses, while communities inland went without. Part of the problem was logistics, part of it was politics, and part of it was neglect. Puerto Rico, a U.S. territory, did not receive the same speed or scale of response seen after disaster on the mainland, and people noticed. Images began circulating online. Elderly residents waiting in line for water under the sun. Hospitals operating without air conditioning. Patients dying not from injuries, but from heat. One image stood out. A long convoy of aid trucks, parked and unused, while nearby towns had nothing. Anger grew. Local officials openly criticized the response. Doctors spoke out. Journalists documented the reality on the ground. Residents took to the streets, demanding answers. As days turned into weeks, frustration turned into outrage. The death toll kept rising quietly, while official numbers remained low. Families buried loved ones without electricity, without funerals, without closure. Too many on the island. It felt like they were being forgotten, and that feeling only deepened when the world began to move on. For months, the official death count from Hurricane Maria remained shockingly low. Dozens, then a few hundred. But on the ground, people knew the truth. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Funeral homes were overflowing. Doctors were seeing deaths that clearly would not have happened without the storm. Independent researchers stepped in. Instead of counting only direct storm deaths, they looked at something else: excess deaths. How many more people died after Maria than would have died normally? The answer was devastating. Study after study confirmed the same conclusion. Thousands had died, not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily, silently, as systems failed and help arrived too late. Eventually, the official estimate was revised to over 3,000 deaths. By then, the damage was already done. Trust was broken. For many families, the acknowledgement came far too late to matter, and Hurricane Maria took its place in history, not just as one of the most destructive hurricanes in U.S. records, but one of the deadliest. By the time the full scope of the disaster was understood, the numbers were staggering. Economic losses surpassed 90 billion. Entire power systems had to be rebuilt from scratch. Homes were abandoned by the tens of thousands. Businesses closed permanently. The island's population began to shrink. Hundreds of thousands left Puerto Rico in the months and years after the storm, many never returning. Families were split. Communities hollowed out. Recovery was slow and uneven. Some areas were rebuilt. Others remained at their state for years. Blue tarps stayed on roofs long after the headlines faded, and the question lingered, not just on the island, but in the minds of anyone paying attention. How could this happen? How could a storm expose so many weaknesses, cause so much suffering, and leave so many behind? Which leads to the question everyone eventually asks: so what does Puerto Rico look like now? What happened to the island Hurricane Maria nearly destroyed? Well, before we answer that, we have to understand how the response to Maria changed Puerto Rico forever, politically, socially, and emotionally in the years that followed. In the days after the storm, the island was running on improvisation. Local governments were overwhelmed almost immediately. Mayors used handwritten notes and radio messages to report missing people and destroyed towns. Hospitals sent desperate warnings about fuel shortages. Doctors publicly stated that patients were dying, not because of injuries, but because care could not reach them. Federal aid did arrive, but slowly, unevenly, and often without coordination. Supplies sat at ports, while communities inland went without food, water, and medicine. What shocked people most wasn't just the delay, but the contrast. Puerto Rico was part of the United States, yet the response felt distant, disorganized, and detached. That perception sparked anger, protest, and a deep sense of abandonment. Then came the controversy over the death toll. For months, officials reported numbers that many on the island knew were wrong. It took independent researchers and public pressure for the true scale of loss to be acknowledged. By then, trust had already collapsed. The response to Hurricane Maria didn't just fail to protect people in a crisis. It permanently changed how Puerto Rico viewed authority. Preparedness and its place in the system meant to protect it. Because the storm didn't just reshape the land, it reshaped trust. Today, parts of Puerto Rico look rebuilt. Power lines stand taller. New buildings rise when old ones fell. Tourist areas shine again, but beneath the surface, the scars remain. Many communities still face unstable electricity. Blackouts are common. Infrastructure upgrades came, but not everywhere, and not evenly. For those who lived through Maria, the memory never left. Every hurricane season brings fear. Every storm forecast brings anxiety. People remember how quickly everything collapsed. They remember how long it took for help to arrive. They remember the silence. Hurricane Maria became more than a natural disaster. It became a warning, a reminder of what happens when systems fail, when preparation falls short, and when recovery depends on politics instead of urgency. Puerto Rico survived Hurricane Maria, But survival came at a cost that cannot be measured only in dollars or death counts.
They're imposing a curfew for its 4.3 million residents.
We're looking at 4 to 6 months without electricity.
Roofs ripped off of homes, streets completely flooded.
It changed the island, and it changed how disasters are remembered. Subscribe for more hurricane documentaries like this.